Well, hello, everyone. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief, Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this special presentation, Overcome the Barriers to an Effective Omnichannel Shipping Strategy. Now, these barriers include siloed shipping processes, outdated protocols, and carrier complexity that typically stand in the way of effective omnichannel shipping. This presentation is sponsored by PeerBridge and Banyan Technology and joined by ConnectShip Housekeeping. Speaking of housekeeping, one quick housekeeping note. At the end of this presentation, we will have a Q&A session. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the course of the presentation by clicking on the box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. So, I want to introduce to you three fantastic speakers we have today, beginning with Bob Malley. He is Managing Director of PeerBridge. With over 30 years of experience in the parcel carrier management software industry, Bob introduced one of the first multi-carrier parcel shipping systems to the market. He is the Managing Director of PeerBridge, Inc., a subsidiary of WiseTech Global and developer of TransStream, an enterprise shipping platform. Bob will be followed by Lance Healy. He is Founder and Chief Innovation Officer of Banyan Technology. Lance has delivered logistics solutions for over 20 years in that role. His focus has been on delivering solutions to the consumers of LTL services, from retail to commercial and industrial, to providing connectivity solutions to 3 of the top 5 largest freight brokers in the market and hundreds of other clients. And then we'll hear from Tim Leary. He is Director of Operations with ConnectShip. He has been in the transportation industry for 18 years with various roles within small package and contract logistics operations, customer program management, and most recently as the Global Operations Manager for Customer Program Management within Customer Solutions at UPS. And with that, I want to pass it over to Bob Malley. Bob, take it away.
Well, thank you, Bob, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. Today, Lance, Tim, and I want to talk about what we're seeing in the market with omni-channel shipping trends and some of the challenges we're seeing retailers face to meet customer demand for free and faster delivery and more convenient returns. Now, I guess it's worth stating that altogether our companies support several thousand customers who use our technology mainly to manage multi-carrier parcel and LTL. And with the emergence of omni-channel fulfillment, we've had a kind of a front row seat in observing the technology changes and innovations this has entailed and required. So each of us have had to steer our company's technology direction in a way that is responsive to the shift in shipping and delivery requirements. So we thought it would be interesting and helpful to provide kind of an insider's view of market trends, challenges, and how that has changed the direction and complexion of transportation management technology. It's worth noting that a recent study by Statistica shows that 22% of North America retailers consider omni-channel experience as a top priority. That leaves, 78% who don't consider it a top priority. So as with every market, there are leaders and laggards. So we assume that many of you on this call are maybe further along on the path of implementing your omni-channel strategy, others in catch-up mode, while others are struggling to achieve the expected return on investment. So our hope today is that our observations will help you gain some insight into what you need to consider from a technology standpoint to be successful in the ever-changing environment. So we'll start by taking a look at e-commerce, and some of the trends that we're seeing. When we think of some of the changes that are occurring in transportation and logistics, we have to look at the growth of e-commerce as a key driver. Likely everybody on this call is aware that e-commerce is growing because of each of us have probably buying habits ourselves that have transformed over the last several years. We're all buying more online. But most people don't realize this e-commerce purchasing is still represents a relatively low percentage of retail sales. As you can see from this chart, e-marketing estimates that the U.S. domestic e-commerce will continue to experience double-digit growth and reach almost $1 trillion in sales by 2023, which is nearly double 2018's $514 billion sales figure. So by any measure, this is amazing growth, and yet in 2023 it will still only represent 16% of total retail sales. So what the takeaway from this is there's a lot of room for growth, even if the rate of change seems to be slowing down a bit. So whatever impact domestic e-commerce is having on logistics and shipping patterns will only likely increase in the future as international e-commerce continues to gain steam. So on the international side, Tim, what have you seen in terms of growth there?
Well, in a word, China. I mean, the growth that we're first off, before I get into this, thanks for having me, guys. The audience here obviously has a lot of experience here, but I think the key focus for e-commerce growth, not only globally but certainly in Asia, is China. If you look at the graphic here, one of the things that you're going to see is this continued trend of growth and near tripling over this time period that we're going to see here in retail e-commerce. One of the things for your audience to keep an eye on is where's that growth coming from? Well, it's coming from China, and if you think of it just from a population standpoint, I imagine most of the audience is here in the U.S. There's over 650 million digital buyers over in China, and they represent anywhere from 55 to 60% of the overall population. Now you compare that in a census year to the U.S. of what our total population is, and you see the dynamics of demographics that are playing over there as it relates to sales volumes and the impacts on global e-commerce growth. So you're seeing this growth, and what you're seeing is not only the domestic China market, but also a lot of exporters that are trying to move goods cross-border, like we talked about in previous discussions, Bob. That impact is having a huge dynamic shift in terms of how spending is happening and where it's coming from. I mean, it's a challenge, right? Growth is a challenge. You have this cross-border activity, but it's a good challenge to have. And some of the impacts of those challenges start spilling over into other areas, which come into my next point, which is increased expectations of these buyers. So I think what you're going to see as we go through and we look at this growth is how do you pair that growth with, as you started out with, Bob, those rising expectations and those buying patterns that each of us have experienced and have changed over the last couple of years. So as we move on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about kind of these rising expectations, this dynamic of the two F words, fast and free. That is the consistent message that consumers are putting out to both shippers, retailers, and essentially online shoppers are saying, look, hey, if this shopping cart, if the cost is too high and I have to wait too long for a delivery, then guess what? I'm going to drop out of it. As you see here, cost of delivery remains by a pretty wide margin the key reason for cart abandonment for users and shoppers. That rising expectation in that sweet spot in the right mix of fast and free is probably one of the most challenging things that all parts of retailers and the supply chain are dealing with today. I'm going to reference some research by Pitney Bowes, and they talked about consumers tracking orders over the life of a delivery cycle between 8 and 10 times. A lot of that is just driven by that concept of visibility. I'll get into that a little bit later in our discussion, but visibility And that ability to find out when this thing is coming to my house or my place of business, we understand how critical e-commerce and logistics are tied together. The challenge for shippers and for retailers is how to find that right sweet spot between fast and free. So I'm going to move over to a couple of the benefits, or Bob's going to move over to a couple of the benefits. And I think that elevation of the customer experience, how to support that customer experience, is we're seeing some unintended consequences that are impacting the return side of the business, which is pretty critical here as well. So, Bob, I'll let you talk a little bit more about returns.
Yeah, I think returns was once viewed as kind of an exceptional occurrence, something to be avoided. I remember calling on a mail order company, if you can remember what those were, and I asked how they handled returns because there was a big pile of returns on a pallet in the corner, and whether including a return label in the carton would help, improve customer satisfaction. And kind of looked at me like I had two heads, and simply said, "We don't want our products returned," which is quite beside the point. Now returns are seen as an essential part of the online buying experience, and consumers are as finicky about free and fast and simple as they are about free and fast outbound delivery. And according to Stamps research, 72% of shoppers said that return policies directly influence their buying decisions. And to add to that, some of the merchants that are out there have embraced returns as part of their overall business model. If you think of Warby Parker, for example, they ship out multiple eyeglass frames, and you return the ones you don't want, and they charge for the ones you keep. And my wife recently signed up for a company called Stitch Fix. She fills out a survey. She describes what her style is. They send her 5 items, and she sends back what she doesn't want, which is most of them. And they provide a pouch and a label, and she drops it off at the local post office, and it's done. So that's it. It's returns is an important part of the new e-commerce paradigm, and whether the returns process is an exception or intentional, free returns like free shipping has an impact on margin because nothing in the world is free. So as e-commerce continues to grow, retailers are have had to factor in the return rate as having an impact on their margin. And for that reason, returns has assumed a kind of a prominent position in retail omnichannel strategies, especially where return to store, has the potential for creating foot traffic and upselling opportunities. So as we look at the next slide, the question is asked, what is omnichannel fulfillment? And really, omnichannel retail strategies is about merging of brands' physical and online world together to provide customers with an easy and consistent shopping experience. At the top, buyers can buy online, at a store, order from a kiosk, or call customer service, or for those, who are still using mail order, they send in a form. The omni-channel fulfillment side means that items can be made available from a variety of different inventory sources, whether they're stores, DCs, manufacturers, drop ships from manufacturers, or even in-transit inventory. And on the right side, buyers can pick up from stores, have it delivered to their home, or pick it up at a collection point for those urban shippers who are urban buyers that are concerned with porch pirates and the like. I remember years ago I went to buy a store at a mall, and they didn't have the model in stock, and that was kind of the end of the story. The store clerk was blissfully unaware of when I could expect to receive it, and so I left the store and bought a phone someplace else. Fast forward years later, a month ago, I looked up best printers on Consumer Reports. I clicked on the product. They showed me a map of where I could buy it. I looked at 2 Staples stores. It said which ones had it in stock, which ones didn't. I bought it from that store online using my mobile phone. I picked it up 2 hours later. Totally different buying experience. Fast, convenient, easy, omnichannel. So you can see immediately the appeal for consumers. And omnichannel fulfillment has been the norm for large marketplaces, but for brick and mortar retailers, it's been, I guess, slow in coming. But Lance, in addition to the benefits that consumers get, what are the benefits for brick and mortar retailers driving from the strategy?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Hey, so they're competing with the online marketplaces, right? So everything's fast and at least promoted as free shipping. But a lot of the brick and mortar retailers, they can't absorb billions of dollars in lost shipping costs. So they're leveraging their stores, as you said, their inventory sources is whatever's closest to the consumer. Interesting study McKinsey did a year or so ago, talking about a proximity to a warehouse and a strategy of a single DC is around 823 miles to get to the bulk of the consumers, whereas if somebody's got even 35 stores, they're within, or distribution centers, they're within 83 miles. Which is well within a next day or same day range. But the real advantage and what the benefit for the brick and mortar folks is they already have the real estate. They already have the existing stores that they can convert into these mini DCs. And we're seeing that happen. It's been happening over the last couple of years. Target has been a real shining example of that, on opening up their stores as ship to or ship from points that they can leverage that inventory. And they've been able to achieve that through pretty aggressive investments in technology and really making a point of it as a strategy. And worthy of note around this is that, everybody's talking about e-commerce and certainly the impact on the direct-to-consumer delivery. It also needs to be noted on the impact of the manufacturers and suppliers and their shifts from traditional large truckload shipments to parcel, local carriers, LTL. So there's a whole sea change that's happening on that side as well. So, Tim, your perspectives on that?
Yeah, I mean, the growth, I'm going to talk a little bit about the growth globally, but your commentary about the shifts for smaller, more frequent shipments, it has impacts everywhere. You talked a little bit about getting closer to the customer, brick and mortar. I mean, the reality is that you're seeing more urban distribution centers. You're seeing use of the brick and mortar model, and that ability to get closer to the customer is it's critical. It drives customer experience, which ultimately leads to repeat sales and repeat customers. You see the global parcel shipping breakout. I got news for a lot of the U.S.-based folks on the call. China just last year, they surpassed us in terms of overall e-commerce spend. And that's going to widen out over the next decade as it relates to that spend and that difference. So right now, China has just surpassed the U.S. in terms of global parcel shipping. We're talking here about omnichannel, that ability to essentially meet and then exceed those expectations for the customers are critical. On average, as I quoted the Pitney Bowes comment up here, in 2018 there were 23 parcels shipped per person. And that is going to continue to grow. You're going to continue to see that per person or per parcel shipment go up throughout both the U.S. and China. I think the challenge you're going to find is you can talk about the FedExes of the world. You can talk about the UPSs, the small parcel delivery. I think the the thing that you also want to focus on is the LTL sector. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how the LTL sector is being impacted, but they're going to be a key portion of the transportation and supply chain networks that drive growth and that drive that customer experience I referenced at the start of this. Lance, what are you seeing in the transportation industry specific to LTL?
Yeah, that's my world. But so you're 100% right. LTL has increased over 8% in 2018, and certainly private fleets were north of 13%. That whole traditional model of heavy truckload freight into DCs loaded with inventory is definitely changing with smaller footprints, and that increase in LTL both for inbound into these smaller warehouses is coupling with a very poignant local delivery strategy. So even though 2018 was like a banner year across all freight, over-the-road freight, LTL continues to climb faster than truckload in demand in 2019, and that trend is absolutely continuing in 2020. The ship from store strategy is also driving a pretty significant local delivery services, as a lot of the consumers are getting more comfortable ordering larger goods online. And a big trend that we've noticed in the evolution of local delivery is really in the sophistication of the providers there. And what used to be kind of a loose conglomerate of mom and pop cartage companies has been evolving rapidly into very advanced tech-enabled consolidators that have been partially fueled by investors coming into that space and trying to fill that demand for a national local delivery network, that can compete with the big online marketplaces. So all of that's happening, but where the rubber hits the road, Tim, from an operator's perspective, what are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Lance. I mean, what keeps logistics managers up at night? I mean, in previous life in my career, I was played in contract logistics, small package, and those things that kept me up, and I'm sure some of the audience members have had that in their career, is customer experience. Am I meeting the customer demand? Am I challenged now in a way I wasn't, let's say, 10 years ago when I was in a group where you'd have a niche area called service parts logistics that had 2, 4, and 8-hour delivery. Now that's the expectation for the average customer. And so that puts a tremendous amount of stress on the networks that are being supported. The other one is technology. Do I have visibility? Do I have capabilities to meet visibility, timeliness, automation that support my business or my customer's business? And then the disruption and risks that are out there as they relate to the supply chain. I mean, you think of some of the things that are going on right now across the globe in terms of the current pandemic. And those are things that you have to have risk management and scenario playing where you can think through that. So as an old director of mine used to say, hey, you've identified the problem. Great. Now tell me what the answer is. What are the answers to each of those? I think a couple ways you address them is you got to have strong partnerships. An organization can't do and execute on their own. They have to have good partnerships within the technology sector and the transportation sector. Number two is talent retention and recruitment. You have to have the horses to play in this really complex environment, and you have to have people who are talented that are going to be able to help you address the challenges that your organization or your customers' organizations face. And then number three is you have to have technology that pairs with that talent and allows you to do things that maybe a year ago, maybe 6 months ago, you couldn't do, that allows you to kind of execute on some of the visions that you put out for your organization. So I've talked about some of the risks and some of the things that would keep my former self up and some of the solutions. Bob, you're going to talk a little bit about some core solutions that will get a little bit deeper into how to address these challenges. Bob, are you with me?
I am on mute. Sorry about that. Yeah, as you pointed out, Tim, success relies on the partnerships, talent, expertise, and technical infrastructure enhancements. I want to focus on that last point with this slide, in that in terms of technical infrastructure enhancements, it becomes the key to supporting the omni-channel fulfillment. So what we really want to talk about is kind of a geeky insider baseball kind of stuff, but I think it's important to understand what's happening, what we all see happening with transportation platforms. For those of you who intend to upgrade or enhance your IT systems. So traditionally, enterprise architectures have had to support typically a single enterprise, and it mostly linked to a discrete number of internal locations. Shipping systems have followed that sort of route from client server to enterprise, where it might span over, hundreds of locations. But in the omni-channel world, there's been a shift to a more federated, we call it a federated multi-enterprise architecture, capable of looking across and controlling both internal and external inventories. So you can easily see this with some of the more modern distribution order management systems, or DOMs, like IBM Sterling DOM, which is systems that provide businesses with a global view across multiple systems and supply chain stakeholders who are involved in fulfilling orders. You also see that with modern WMS systems that offer warehouse within a warehouse views of inventory based on customer segments that are specific to those product lines. So what an omni-channel shipping platform has had to evolve has followed suit and provides multi-enterprise support, the ability to support configurable user roles and flexible workflows, because how a DC ships is just different from how a store ships or a supplier ships, and not one size fits all. So in this diagram, you can see multiple enterprises, and each with its own set of user groups, and each user group with its own set of permissions, carrier rates, workflows, business rules, and they're different depending upon who the stakeholder is. So sitting above that is an enterprise community management console that with tools that allow retailers to be adaptive and to be agile as supply chain partnerships change and carrier networks expand. Now, this is a model that we first saw with rolled out to 3PLs and SaaS solution providers who have, featured multi-tenant solutions in clouds. But retailers and their supply chain partners are having to look a lot more like 3PLs to accommodate, a multitude of fulfillment requirements as required by omni-channel fulfillment. Now, it's worth noting that it's really hard for a single enterprise architecture to morph into a multi-enterprise. It's a little bit like a single-family home trying to morph into an apartment building. It's just a different framework, especially when it comes to managing carriers and managing a delivery network. So building on this, or I guess drilling down a little bit on that carrier side, Lance, what are you seeing in terms of how a multi-enterprise architecture supports global, national, regional, local, parcel, and LTL delivery?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the best thing that I love about it, the core idea around expanding a carrier network, is really having the visibility to all options at the time of the shipment. What we're seeing, a lot of the traditional lines between modes and providers are getting blurred just because of their various service offerings. So first thing we love to see is burn your routing guide and replace it with a web-based TMS solution that supports API rating and execution. There's a ton of them out there, but find the right one that fits for you and the most flexibility that gives you to work with your carriers. So that's the key. The first step is get that agility. And then rate shopping, that whole process can include all kinds of complex business rules like carrier exclusion preferences based on performance or comparing options across modes. The other thing that we've seen as a change is really investing in a containerization technology. This helps not only minimize unexpected dimensional charges, also certainly to the consumer impact, it's any negative sustainability experience from overpackaging, et cetera. But just as Omnichannel is bringing agility into the supply chain, the carrier pricing needs to reflect those changes as well. So now if you're shipping anywhere from anywhere, you'll need to support the support of your carrier's pricing from anywhere to anywhere, which is best practices we've seen through monthly feedback loops with carriers that has regular updates on here's where traffic is going, et cetera. It helps the carriers minimize their risk. And then for LTL, you apply things like intelligent pricing. All of a sudden you see agreements are averaging more than a 12% cost savings for a lot of the retailers. But in addition to pricing, obviously so comes visibility. So Tim, you got some points to share on that.
I do. To me, I think visibility is probably the attribute that whether an individual is in let's say a CFO position, whether they're running a carrier network, they're a transportation manager out on the floor, they're throughout any position in the supply chain, visibility is the key attribute that anybody is looking for. And I think the challenge becomes, how do you do so in a manner, as you were noting, Lance, that has a span or breadth that allows you to see throughout that supply chain with tools that are common across different nodes and modes that you're using. And I think for a lot of organizations, whether you're on the carrier side, whether you're on the shipper side, I think that concept is critical and becomes even more important now with all the different data points that you can have within the supply chain. I mean, you got to remember, the supply chain is really about the funds, the goods, and the data that go across a network. And I think the challenge now is you're getting more information in more detail, and how do you put tools in place that allow you to sift through that and provide insight or allow you to make decisions that support your strategy, again, support the customer, and ultimately allow you to change and adapt in a very, very challenging market. So when I look at visibility, I think that is the key attribute that folks in organizations that support a supply chain are looking for. The analytics piece, it's not table scraps. That's got to be a part of those visibility tools as well, because those analytics are going to allow you to make decisions as an organization in-house, or again, provide it out to your customer about making decisions that impact their organization. So when I look at visibility, and I come from a couple different backgrounds, I think it is the attribute that organizations look at. Now, visibility carries over more than the movement of goods and information. Remember, as I said earlier, the third leg of the supply chain stool is funds. So Lance is going to speak a little bit about the funds piece, the fund stuff, the billing, and how impactful omnichannel shipping platforms have to account for billing.
Absolutely. There's nothing more fun than billing. But for companies that have already started their omni-channel strategies, most companies figure out pretty quickly that, the front side can evolve, the in-transit visibility evolves, and the back office also has to evolve. And so what we're seeing as a trend in a lot of these billing is that as digital shipping records, more fluid pricing are enabling more self-service auditing, and the traditional audit process, especially around freight, needs to improve or improves because there's more data and price visibility at the time of the routing selection. And also the notion of decades-old notions of standing up and managing big silos of data is incredibly cumbersome and limiting because it really can't keep pace with the changes in the rates and the negotiations with the carriers that the APIs enable and that the market is demanding. So audit role is probably, we're going to start to see that shift towards more services managing exceptions and disputes. A lot of the TMS systems are increasing the automating and matching and validation processes with set tolerances to flag disputes. And the big drivers in that is that the carriers are really driving into new pricing formats. And these have impact on simplifying billing because the carriers are moving into a lot more preferences towards spot quoting. Now, there's true dynamic pricing, which people have talked about. You may hear in the news, and that is a carrier saying, "Hey, I'm going to give you market-based pricing, and I can shift it up or down," which is often terrifying for a retailer. Intelligent pricing gives the carriers the ability to spot quote only as a discount from the shipper's negotiated rates, so it can only go down from the contractor pricing. It can't go up. Carriers are using this as a new method to offer automated live lane specials through the TMS systems so they can fill capacity, optimize their own networks, so it's really a win for both parties. So, but in either case, whether it's dynamic or whether it's intelligent pricing, the traditional audit back office processes will continue to evolve to reflect those advances in kind of the pricing and technology. So, Bob, that's some big shifts we're seeing in that area.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. And I think part of that is, again, having a multi-enterprise view, provides those who are responsible for analytics and billing with more data, better data that is more easily shared among the stakeholders. On this next slide, we talked internally about some of the criticisms about omni-channel retail along the lines of retailers trying to do too much, selling to anybody by any means, fulfilling from anywhere to anywhere. Generally, as business owners, we think of that sort of business strategy of trying to serve every customer by whatever remains possible at whatever cost is a suspect strategy, which means it is likely to have an impact on the old DuPont financial levers of cost, revenue, working capital, and fixed capital. That's why it's important increasingly, and this is, I think, where gathering data and analytics comes in, for omnichannel stakeholders to look at supply chains through a financial lens, because it helps to rationalize and prioritize the investments that they continue to make in omnichannel technologies, as we've described. So as you look at improving customer experience, for example, your course of actions should consider what is the revenue impact of an endless aisle of goods. How likely is it to reduce stockouts and lost sales? How will free shipping and returns reduce shopping cart abandonment and returns to solidify your customer coming back to buy more goods from you? And all of that at what cost? Free shipping and returns have an impact on margin and working capital. especially where the cost of transportation is growing at 3 times the inflation rate currently. So having systems in place to reduce the cost of free shipping with dynamic pricing, as Lance was pointing out, intelligent routing can help mitigate those cost factors. And of course, with fixed capital costs, it's often said that brick and mortar retailers don't have a sales problem because retail sales continues to expand. They have a real estate problem. Their rate of return on fixed capital investments are under pressure. So the right omni-channel strategy should help to improve the return on investment in stores and fixtures. In terms of working capital, as Lance mentioned, really you could look at Target as the model of a retailer that has successfully reconfigured its stores for omni-channel and is reaping the benefits. They've had 11 consecutive quarters of growth. They reached $77 billion last year with $800 million in earnings. Whereas Sears is an example of a retailer that failed to meet to make the transition, really running out of working capital and filing bankruptcy in 2015. They just simply were unable to navigate, the change to omni-channel and digital technology faster than to offset the declines in store revenue. So in the end, e-commerce is here to stay. It will continue to challenge retailers as it expands globally. Not changing is not a choice. Of course, it is here to stay, and we just need to. We are seeing retailers continuing to invest in new kinds of platforms that will give them a competitive advantage. So, looking at implementation of omni-channel through a financial lens only makes sense. So I think we've reached the end here, and I want to thank Lorraine and Bob for helping to host this session, and I will hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and it is indeed time for question and answers. Once again, even now, audiences are encouraged to submit your questions by clicking on that box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. We do have some questions already, however, and I'm going to start with one that is aimed at Tim. Question is, you mentioned visibility. What can retailers do to overcome the struggles of managing inventory as more shipments are sourced and shipped across borders?
Good question. I think number one is you have to have good partners, and with those partners, you have to identify the ability to execute on what the expectations are. I think planning is critical, inventory planning, but inventory planning paired with a really good inventory planning system and TMS. Those tools will help in that cross-border model. And then I'd add one other thing is you really have to stay relevant and be aware of what's going on through visibility. You may have changes in order patterns. You may have changes in demand, and you have to be able to shift on the fly very, very quickly. So I would say you have to be nimble, and you have to use those technology tools with good partners to be able to manage cross-border inventory very well.
Thank you very much. This one is for Lance. You referenced a company, I guess, was it Target? You referenced as a company growing its ship from store strategy. Can this also help a regional chain that doesn't quite have the same reach?
Absolutely. And the idea is that the scale of whether it's a regional player, regional set of stores, or it's a national or international, the concepts are still the same. I think the steps to implement from what we've seen are still the same. Getting best practices, as Tim alluded to, it really starts with a technology as a base platform, and then complementing that with the providers that you need for your particular product good that you're shipping. So whether it's home delivery, in-home room of choice with setup and removal of dunnage, or a parcel strategy or a combination of both, the concepts, the theories, and the base technology investments are all going to be the same.
Thank you. This one for Bob. With all this growth of international shipping, how do we manage the returns process without breaking the bank? Bob, are you muted again?
You're on mute again, Bob.
Sorry about that. I would say that there are 3PLs out there that really specialize in consolidating returns and providing a cross-border deconsolidation into requisition networks. I think it's probably worth noting that 86% of all goods coming into the U.S. come by ocean. So their goods are coming in consolidated, whether they travel for a portion of that leg as parcel. They still are coming in consolidated and then deconsolidating into distribution networks. So I think the same really is true with returns. You've got to, as Tim pointed out, you've got to pick a good 3PL or returns partner to affect that.
Great. I'm going to throw this next one out to whoever wants to take it. What are the biggest issues and opportunities for packaging in e-commerce?
Bob, I'm going to throw out a quick
answer.
answer. You may want to add. I would say opportunities are honestly at the point of sale. If there are packaging tools and systems out there, both software and hardware, that can optimize at the point of order. And that's really where you want to be when you're trying to optimize consolidations or packaging for, let's say, smalls and irregulars. You want to do it at the very start of that order with accurate, timely item master information. Bob, you can add to that, but I thought I'd jump in first.
Yeah, I think that's true, Tim. And what Gartner is telling us is that the customer's sustainability experience is an all-time high. They don't want to see wasteful packaging. They don't want to see wasteful packing. And so so what we're seeing is a demand for algorithms that can look at an order, look at the master data, and determine what's the best way of packing it to reduce air in the containers, and providing packers with the most transportation cost-effective way of packing. Of course, eliminating DIMS is equally as important.
Okay. Here is one of the hottest issues in technology these days that seems to be insinuated itself into every subject, and that is, will blockchain be a critical factor with supply chain, and relevant to what you guys have been talking about today?
Sure. And this is Lance. I'd love to. I think blockchain is absolutely a factor. We've seen a huge impact in terms of tracking produce. The famous example of Walmart used to take 2 weeks to track produce and pull all kinds of stuff off the shelf with an E. coli breakout. Now they can track it to a specific field in 11 seconds. That is a huge impact for blockchain. Where I think blockchain also has a tendency to be overused or trying to be over-applied. We've had folks come to us and say, hey, we want to put our bill of ladings in a blockchain, which is usually a way overkill. So I kind of liken it. I can get my Chinese food delivered by armored car, but I really don't need to. So there's definitely a great place for it, but it's got to be the right fit where it really adds significant value over and above just sharing information. Any of you guys have other thoughts or experiences on that?
I concur. I just think it's still at the top of the hype curve, maybe not yet on its way down. But I think it's as soon as it becomes useful and not a technology in search of a problem to solve.
Great. Sounds good. Okay, we're going to end this now. Any audience questions that did not get asked in the course of this presentation, I'm sure that our speakers would be more than happy to answer them offline following. But in the meantime, I want to thank three fantastic speakers today: Bob Malley of PeerBridge, Lance Healy of Banyan Technologies, and Tim Leary of ConnectShip. Thanks to all of you for your time and presentation, and thank you, audience, for listening in. Everybody, have a great day.
Appreciate it.